Welcome to listener John Ash. Today, I am speaking with Gregory Landua, the CEO of Regen Network, and him and I are in a pretty unique position here because it seems that we've been quite prescient in our work over the last 5 or 6 months because everybody appears to be talking about GPT right now. And a lot of people don't know this, but Gregory and Regen Network have essentially funded me to exist by having me create a fine-tuned generative model called Ceres, which is imbued with all of the knowledge and ideas and complexities about what Regen Network is, has been, and will be into one of these queryable models. GPT has a lot of knowledge in it, but if you're an upcoming project, it's not going to know exactly about the particulars. So you have to actively train and tell it specifically what the idea is. And so I spent 4 months doing two things. One was creating general software to help them give their feedback to the model and refine it. But the other was just collecting all of this training data and creating a coherent sense of what Regen Network is. So this episode of Listener John Ash is going to be unlike any of the other ones because I'm going to have so much more background and foundation on what it already is. What I found at the end of the project, however, was after I had just told it all of this very technical things like about attestations and validations and proof of stake and the Cosmos SDK and intersubjective verification. After I had done all of that, I took one story that Gregory had written called, I believe, A Story of Liquidity or Tale of Liquidity about carbon liquidity. I fed it to the model, I trained a new one, and I just asked it to write a new story. And this is the story that it told. Stella looked towards her new garden and sighed. It is time to regenerate, she thought, and closed her eyes, resting in the wisdom of generations past. She opened them again, gaze falling on the fine particles of clay and sand that made up the soil. She breathed and sensed the roots growing deep into the ground beneath her, drawing water and nutrients from it to feed the few plants that could survive here. She spoke up. Ceres, what can I do to help this soil? Ceres was a living system of knowledge about how to care for the land. It had been built over many years by generations past as they learned more about how to live in harmony with the land. Ceres was named after the Roman goddess of agriculture, and she knew a lot about how to grow food. Ceres replied, "You can add compost made from leaves of grass clippings that have been chopped up into small pieces." Ceres continued as Stella listened carefully. Yard waste contains nitrogen and other nutrients that are important for growing plants. Ceres paused. "Do we have any?" "I do not," Stella said sadly. "My village is too far from the forest to get enough leaves or grass clippings. There's not a lot of that near here." "Okay, let me scan the Regen registry for data. I think I know a local farmer who already plans to come this way with some compost." Ceres paused. "I'm sorry, I don't have any to offer you right now, but maybe we can find a way to get some more here in the future?" Stella smiled and nodded. "Yes, please," she thought further. "Are there any plants that would grow well in the soil that could naturally add organic matter?" Ceres replied, "I don't know. I need to consult the Regen registry for that." Ceres paused. "The soil here is very poor in organic matter and nutrients. If we want to grow food here, it will take a lot of work." Ceres continued as Stella listened carefully. "Some examples of plants that would grow in the soil are dandelion, clover, and iris." "Iris?" Stella asked. "Like the flower?" "I love iris. I didn't know they could survive here. I need to plant some iris." "I will consult the Regen registry for more information as I am only 75% certain that iris could grow here. I will need to consult for more data." Ceres paused. "Iris are a type of flower that can grow in many different environments. They are rhizomatous and have very fine roots, and they can grow in places where there is not much organic matter or nutrients." Ceres continued as Stella listened carefully. "They are native to many parts of the world and are often used for making medicines." Stella smiled. I will try to plant iris here based on that certainty. I hope they grow. Ceres, can you please consult the Regen registry to find out more about iris so that I know what to expect? Ceres replied, yes, of course. So this was written whole cloth from the ideas that we had put into the model. Now, Regen Network does not currently work like this. Regen Network currently is based on the idea of the eco credit. They're building out the tools to be able to have the data foundation that they need to have the sort of interoperability between chains using Cosmos SDK. And we're going to talk in detail about what it is now. But Gregory has a very big and broad vision about what it can be. And he's sort of been on the side putting money into both GPT and technologies related to regenerative intelligence in general. That means any AI related to how we can take the data that is being stored by the Regen Network and act upon it in intelligent ways, because regenerating ecosystems is a very, very complex thing. So that's where we stand today. And I would just pause for a second and say, Gregory, what are your thoughts? Where is your head right now? Just say like anything that you're thinking about.
Yeah, well, it's really first off, grateful to be here, excited for the conversation. That story that Ceres generated, I read it out loud to my wife after you texted it to me, and we were both, teary-eyed, just getting a little bit weepy just reading it, and it's just interesting to, the feeling. The felt sense of being gotten is such a rarity. I know people do whole workshops on the art of humans circling each other and asking questions to deepen more authentic relating.
Mm-hmm.
And, in some way, my experience of working with you on training this generative model is sort of similar in and it's interesting because, I oftentimes use this word intersubjective.
Mm-hmm.
I first came across that word actually, I guess, from integral or integral adjacent world of authentic relating, where
Mm-hmm.
they would refer to circling as an intersubjective meditation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In which people are really sort of tuning into their somatic experience, but also asking reflective, sort of Socratic questions to get something more deeply. And oftentimes in that kind of process, people end up having, these kind of cathartic realizations of, because they're being seen by others, and maybe they're seeing a part of themselves that they were blind to or couldn't see. And it's just interesting that I think we conceive of machines and maybe the machine mind or artificial intelligence as kind of a dry, abstract, future thing. But the humanness of that experience and how it resonates with some of the more deeply human, humanist inquiries that currently are kind of at the edge of, I don't know, like the scenester culture, I guess. or maybe we're at the edge of the scenester culture 5 or 6 years ago. I think it's just really interesting. So that's my first just off the cuff reflection, just at a high level. This all felt like a deeply human experience.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. And I've tried to communicate this a few times, is that when you have somebody else train a model for you, it's going to be ultimately filtered through their lens of perception. So I scanned through, so many of your blogs and articles and recordings and the public facing things about Regen. And I talked to lots of people. And there were two constraints. One is that there were certain questions that I just couldn't find answers to, and people were just busy. And two, I wanted it to be human in an extent. I wanted it to feel human. And a lot of what I was reading, it felt like cold technical data that I'm like, this could change. I was like reading about like how the voting protocol works with proof of stake for the chain right now. And they're saying specific time frames. I'm like, I don't know whether this is going to be the same in 6 months, so I probably shouldn't bring this into the training data. I had to filter it through like a more holistic sense of what is this, the foundation of it. And if we had just done something as simple as just pulled every single thing, and what I actually tried into in the beginning, it wrote like the FAQ. It wrote very cold. And so I was, towards the end, I was just very interested in finding those human representations. And that's why, I really liked that story of the carbon liquidity. Now, I really want people to actually understand what it is as it is now. And so the Fourthought Dialectic is about just boiling down to as close as we can to what we're trying to communicate. And that starts by doing some definitions of words that are really important to us. We don't really have the same definitions for words. We have one word and then we think it's the same thing. And I say tree, and then there's a deciduous tree in your brain, and there's like a coniferous tree in my brain, and we think we're talking about the same thing. So I think that it is very important to understand Regen Network is just to understand what a carbon credit is foundationally. And know what that is. If you don't know what that is, then it's going to be hard to understand. What is a carbon credit?
Carbon credits are a system whereby people are monitoring carbon emissions and carbon reductions and placing a price on the negative externality of carbon emissions and a price on carbon removals or avoided emissions, and creating a market so that people who are polluting or emitting carbon can purchase carbon offsets to balance our human carbon economy. There are two different sort of sectors of the carbon credit world. One is the compliance world, in which a nation state or a group of nation states basically places a regulation on the amount of carbon emissions that industry can make, and then people can trade the right to emit and can purchase agreed upon or regulated carbon offsets from regulated providers. And then there's voluntary carbon markets, in which it's sort of a similar apparatus, but there's no regulatory oversight or enforced cap and trade. Instead, by and large, you have companies in the voluntary carbon markets basically creating science-based targets for themselves that mimic things happening at the UN and other levels, where they're agreeing to carbon reductions and then they're voluntarily offsetting in order to make up the difference for what they can't reduce. A couple of different...
Let me pause for a second. So that's going to be a lot of... I have to actually cut up your words because I want both sides of the brain to understand it. The part is the processing sound and to be able to read it and make it visual and make it really so people are receiving the information through more than one just means, right? You're used to people listening to you just talking freely. So that's going to be very hard for me to cut into a thing. So let's just try to just pound through these, and then we can have that free form flow where you just go. So try to keep each to like a few sentences. If we could just do some quick explanations, just like a glossary, like how it would be in an index.
So carbon credits are units of account that represent carbon reductions or avoided emissions. And they're a way of placing a price on carbon in our economy.
Perfect. Eco credits go way beyond that. What's a simple answer of eco credit, and then do a long answer, and I'll just cut that into another part.
Eco credits are a concept that ecosystems, healthy ecosystems, provide services and goods to the greater human economy, or really the lesser human economy, and that we can value those goods and services that those healthy ecosystems are producing as a credit, so that people who are stewarding those ecosystems get paid for the healthy functioning of the ecosystem.
That's great. Did you just want to unleash and just let through a bunch of thoughts about eco credits right off the bat?
So some of the categories of eco credits that are already emerging into today's economy include biodiversity credits, water quality credits, water quantity credits, of course, carbon credits, which we were talking about before. I think, you could think of eco credits as matching ecological debt. So we could
Yeah.
think that our economy goes into ecological debt as we extract value from ecosystems, and we can service that debt by paying for eco credits to incentivize and reward ecological health and stewardship, to balance the harm with regeneration.
Yeah, and I think that's why I honed in on EcoCredit as this sort of fundamental unit that you need to understand the power behind the way that Regen Network is organized. The next phrase I want you to define is ecological state machine.
So the idea of an ecological state machine is that we can create a networked consensus about ecological state that allows us to produce eco credits and value them accurately.
Define ecological state.
So ecological state is flows and function of an ecosystem. And in the context of a state machine, monitored and tracked in a digital form.
Okay. Define state machine.
A state machine is another way of saying a blockchain, or any system that maintains a sense of, or a sense is the wrong word, any system that maintains state. It's sort of, and because it's a machine, right? Humans maintain state. Like my body, my corporeal body, I'm maintaining myself by eating, and then I maintain a body. The biosphere maintains statefulness. So does a blockchain, right? People running mining machines maintain the statefulness of the Bitcoin network. People running validator nodes in a proof of stake network like Regen Ledger maintain the statefulness of the blockchain.
Okay, so what is an ecological asset to you?
Ecological assets are bringing a positive economic value to living capital, to the emergent value of the relationships between species in an ecosystem. So common ecological assets are the carbon that's stored in a forest, or biodiversity and the number of different interactions between different species in the rainforest, for instance.
Are all ecological assets associated with like the commons, or are some ecological assets owned by individuals?
That's a choice that can be made by humans vis-a-vis what political, economic situation they would like to use to govern the interactions between the human economy and the environment.
Could you define your perception of carbon liquidity?
Yeah, so carbon liquidity is, my perception is that term is used a lot and very disconnected from reality. But there's a set of different ways it's used. I could explore each of those different ways if you'd like.
I wanted you to talk about it because of the story that you wrote.
So the
and
story
because Ceres
Ceres
Ceres didn't intuit what you're meaning right away, so I want to know what your specific relation is to
the story that I wrote was called The Parable of Rain, and it was a cautionary tale about the downsides of focusing too much on liquidity, asset liquidity in carbon markets.
Okay. Tell more.
Well, so liquidity, there's a beautiful metaphor between rain and our visceral felt understanding of water flowing across a landscape, and monetary liquidity, or money, currency flowing through our economic and social landscapes. And the Parable of Rain tells a story of a village that has denuded its landscape, and therefore the springs have dried up. And when it does rain, it erodes the landscape. It erodes all of the remaining soil. It cuts deep gullies. It erodes, it sort of washes all of their roads away. It washes what's left of their ecological wealth. And the same is true when you drop massive amounts of money into a system that's not ready to receive it. So just thinking, what happens when there's a torrential downpour on a steep, degraded landscape? Massive erosion. What happens when there's a torrential downpour on a primary forest? What happens when there's a torrential downpour in a landscape that has swales and dams and mixed agroforestry and primary forest corridors? The landscape absorbs the liquidity, the water. All of the water eventually goes down to that deep pool of liquidity we call the ocean. It just goes much, much slower. It goes much, much cleaner. So that allows fish to be in the streams. That allows us not to have eutrophication and dead zones in the ocean as all of the nutrients flow out into the ocean. It allows clean, clear, fresh water to be feeding every level of the ecosystem from the headwaters out to the high seas. But that's only possible if you have resilient, diverse landscape. And that's as true for living systems, for ecosystems, as it is for socio-cultural economic systems, right? In either of those complex systems, what I'm saying I believe to be true.
So what is the analog financially of somebody who receives too much liquidity before they're ready for it?
You see this with people who win the lottery.
That's
right?
what I was thinking in my head. I love that when that happens.
So yes. I believe there's some pretty good studies on this. By and large, people who win the lottery who haven't sort of most people who haven't prepared themselves are going to essentially gamble, drink, and waste all of that money away, and they may actually end up being less healthy after that money has flowed through their lives than they were before that money. So it's it's a great example. It's also good examples of this are what happens in a boom, like a gold rush scenario or an oil boom or a frontier town. You can just sort of see the ugly side of capitalism, as it were. It happens very quick. That erosion of social fabric and human health and ecological health.
So you said a word in there that is on my definition list, resilience.
Yeah. So resilience is a description of the attributes of how durable the statefulness is of a system. Like how easy is it to change or hard is it to change? If it's hard, it's resilient. If it's easy to change, it's not resilient. Or and oftentimes baked into that is an assumption of health, not just change. So like degradation versus regeneration. If a system is going to be heavily impacted and start to degrade very quickly, it's not very resilient. If it could be impacted by some disturbance and maintain its state and even bounce back and become healthier, it's resilient or even anti-fragile. And so there's fragility, resilience, anti-fragility. Those are three different terms with different meanings.
Can you define intersubjective verification?
Intersubjective verification is when we work in a community, understanding that any agent in that community is only able to see from a particular perspective, to attest and share their perspective to form a larger, closer to objective understanding of reality or a question at hand.
Okay, I'm going to give you a constellation of terms that I want you to define in term because they're related, but I think people have trouble understanding the distinction. The four words are regeneration, conservation, sustainability, and permaculture.
Regeneration is an increase in the evolutionary capacity and capability of a system. Sustainability is the maintenance of capacities or capabilities in a system.
Mm-hmm.
Conservation, I think, resonates with sustainability. You're conserving state.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and permaculture is a design science and art with a set of ethics and principles to allow people to design agroecological systems that meet human needs while increasing ecological health or regenerating ecological health. Sorry. I should say different schools of permaculture, some aim to regenerate or improve ecological health. Some may actually aim to sustain or conserve ecological
Okay.
health. Just to
Okay.
say that permaculture could be applied from a paradigm of sustainability and conservation or a paradigm of regeneration.
Mm-hmm. So the word regen itself has become a meme that has become tied to a whole lot of things. What is just regen?
Regen is short for regeneration. It's a way that people identify, hey, I'm a regen instead of a degen. It's kind of becoming a culture. I don't know, regen punk,
Mm-hmm.
sort of adjacent to solar punk. It's a currency and governance token for Regen Network. It's become I guess, an adjective or associated with many different businesses and ventures. I recently saw a VC called Regen Ventures, and there's Regen Farmers, and there's Regen all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of things. I think generally it's sort of ease of use as a shorthand term for regeneration or regenerative, and maybe it's starting to lead towards some coherent ideology like regenerationism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead to one of the questions before I go through the predictions and the statements and the reflections, which is what is the distinction between the Regen registry, the Regen Ledger, the Regen marketplace, Regen, the $, and the Regen network?
Regen Network is the whole. It's a
Mm-hmm.
community of actors who are dedicated to regenerating ecological health and regenerating the symbolic heart of our economy to
Mm-hmm.
realign ecological health and economic health.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Regen Network. Regen Ledger is a public proof of stake blockchain that creates the state machine that brings together Regen Network into a single digital entity. Regen Registry is a specific functionality around registering ecological data standards, methodologies for generating eco credits, and the process of assuring quality of ecological claims and
Mm-hmm.
minting of ecological assets and credits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Regen Marketplace is the peer-to-peer marketplace that allows people to directly list in a disintermediated way the ecological credits and assets that they're generating so that they can sell them directly to each other, to peers.
Mm-hmm.
I did network, ledger, registry, and marketplace. Regen, $Regen.
Yeah, they're fine.
So Regen is a token,
Mm-hmm.
digital token that allows the holder of that token to stake it and secure Regen Ledger and participate in governance. It's also one of the currencies that you can buy and sell eco credits with.
Mm-hmm.
And the community may come up with other novel ideas for the use of Regen in the future.
Yeah. And then there's also I believe the short name is actually R&D, which is just moved to be a nonprofit. Is that correct? That does
R&D is a public benefit corporation.
Okay.
So a public benefit corporation. First, I'll define public benefit corporation, and then I'll talk about R&D. So public benefit corporation is when you expand the bylaws of a normal corporation to include specific public benefit outcomes that the executives of that company will be held accountable to try to achieve and to report on in a yearly basis in the same way that they report on their like financial earnings. So R&D, or Regen Network Development Public Benefit Corp, is a company which is right around 35 people, which develops software such as Regen Ledger, Regen Marketplace, Regen Registry, and does science about how to support the creation of new eco credits into the system.
Mm-hmm. And it is through this that my work has been funded recently. It's through this organization. Give me a second.
While you're thinking about that, I could also say it's also important. Another actor in Regen Network that's important to talk about is Regen Foundation, which is a 501c3 entity that's governed by Regen Consortium, which is a group of entities, and there's a board, and it is responsible for ensuring that ecosystems through rights of nature, land stewards, indigenous people, and scientists have a significant stake in governing Regen Network that can't be bought on the market, but instead can be granted or endowed to them to participate in creating and governing the network and embedding it into a social and cultural context so that it's not just a speculative system.
So Regen Network has already had some large-scale, impactful things that you've done so far that I just wanted to discuss. One would be the deal with Microsoft with the Carbon Plus credits. I believe you purchased a forest or something similar. Could you just go through some of the large, impactful things that you feel that has already happened so far?
Yeah, so we created a methodology for accounting, monitoring, and quantifying soil organic carbon using satellite and on-the-ground data, and sort of fusing those. And we created a new credit class called the Carbon Plus Grasslands credit class, and we sold the first vintage of that credit class to Microsoft in what at that time, and I think maybe to date still, was the largest purchase of soil carbon removal credits. And is now being used around the world to fund holistic management, planned grazing that actually accumulates carbon and is carbon negative instead of being carbon positive, including accounting for methane and other externalities. So that was a big thing, continues to be a big part of what happens in Regen Network world. We also purchased the inventory of city forest credits and brought them into the marketplace. City forest credits are credits produced by municipalities around the United States for preserving forests inside of city limits instead of developing them. Pretty cool. So you can actually go visit a lot of the projects and kind of have a relationship with the value that those credits represent. We have 6 new credit classes that are coming online in Q1. So agroforestry, smallholder agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, biodiversity preservation through keystone species, specifically jaguar. Another class of grazing credits, and or actually 2 more classes of grazing credits. One which is carbon, and one which is actually just the holistic ecological health that emerges when sheep are grazed through vineyards instead of using chemicals or mowers to knock down weeds. That's that's sort of on the ecological side. I kind of go on. There's a lot of stuff happening in the world, but that's some of the highlights. And of course, there's a marketplace where people can go and buy eco credits, and you sort of engage with it in that way. Disclaimer: the marketplace is for crypto native people, so you got to be comfortable with public-private key management and Kepler Wallet and other things. We will eventually be upgrading so that stuff is abstracted and people can have a sort of normal Web 2 consumer experience. But that's not what we were shooting for in our initial product launch.
Okay, so what does it mean to retire an eco credit, and what is the sort of life cycle from birth to retirement of an eco credit?
Yeah, retiring an eco credit means you yourself are claiming credit for the ecological regeneration outcome that credit represents. So it's no longer tradable who gets to be the responsible party to settle their ecological debt, right? So if we have this concept of, there's negative externalities and positive externalities, and we're wanting to balance those using an economic instrument, the person who retires the credit is making that claim.
Yeah, you guys got to add that to your FAQs. That was a hard one to find, and I asked multiple people multiple times, and they just were either busy or didn't respond. And I was like, I want to know the answer to this. It seems important. It seems like I should put it in the training data, and that just connected a lot of things for me. Thank you. Let's do the forethought thing. This is a show where we explore new systems through the Fourthought Dialectic. Fourthought is a protocol within cognitism for declaring claims of truth and one's confidence in them to generative models like GPT. But it also serves as a refined means to exchange perceptions of truth between people. Forethought is a means to increase the signal to noise ratio in natural conversation in a way that is inspired by information theory. And so the way it works is there is a continuous range. It's from 0 to 100. 50% means you just don't know in this moment. And 100% is your 100% it's true. And 0% is you're like completely certain it is false, So it's like if you were at 25%, you're like half certain it's false. If you're at 75, you're like half certain it's true. But 100% is like, oh, I know this. That 100 is like a square is a square, right? And 0 is like a square is a triangle. And I don't know what the perfect uncertain claim is, but it would just be something you completely don't know. So we're going to go from reflections, which is thoughts about the past, to thoughts about or claims about the present to the future. So the first is a sort of calibration thing. Water has always flowed downhill.
Can you define always?
Okay, so the point of this is that when we communicate online, language is, you don't get extra context when you talk to people. And so we're always making these huge assumptions about what other people mean. And then we go on these rambling things. What I want you to do is to bake that uncertainty towards the center. If you don't know what I mean, you don't have the freedom to ask for more clarity. Move your response towards the center, because that would mean you're less certain. But don't ask for more clarity. Just move it towards the center, because that means you don't know.
Okay, well, I'll play. Water's always traveled downhill. I'm 50% certain of that.
Okay. Past humans took actions that damaged the ecology we live in today.
100% certain.
Okay. We have had the capacity to cause ecological degradation for centuries.
100% true.
Okay. People have been incentivized to rely on unsustainable practices.
100% true.
Interesting. Humanity has already exceeded the safe global operating space for many of Earth's ecosystems.
80% true.
Okay. We have had a high degree of confidence about climate change for decades.
50% true.
Okay. We have mitigated some of the effects of climate change through collective action.
0% true.
We've experienced periods of ecological stability over time that have allowed human civilizations to flourish.
99% true.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Societies have collapsed due to ecological degradation.
99% sure.
Humans have had a deep relationship with nature for thousands of years.
100% true.
Over the last 100 years, our relationship with nature has begun to fray.
50% true.
Okay. Humans have successfully restored damaged ecosystems through individual action.
60% sure.
There's a lot of subtlety in that question. Technology has been used as a tool for both destruction and restoration of our environment.
100% sure. Sure.
Okay. Then we're going to just go to general statements. I'm going to ask this again. Water always flows downhill.
50% sure.
Okay. The damage we've done to the...
Wait. I'll say... I'll give it 65% sure. There's just a lot there.
Yes.
The always is hanging me up.
Yes. This is like a thing that Matt Perkowski got me into, which is like, he said something about the binary nature of firing, which is like, what's the minimum viable time frame on which you could say that's declarably true?
Yeah.
And I was like, that's good. That's a good way to put that, dude. Thank you for that.
That's my thing. It's like clearly there's a time frame in which that's 100% true, but you said always, not a time frame.
And that's the thing about this practice, is that I'm trying to get people to feel more comfortable with expressions of uncertainty, because it's like we don't really always know exactly what the other person means, and so it's sort of a healthy practice to embrace a little bit of uncertainty. But when we are people who either, selling things or selling ideas, people really react to certainty. So I think a lot of society has boiled down to, we only communicate in the expressions of certainty. We only have hearts that are full likes, or apparently no dislike at all, or anything like that. These areas of subtlety in between are becoming lost, and it becomes harder to speak to each other if we're always certain that we're fully in alignment. So this is what this practice is about.
Totally.
Did I say this already? The damage we've done to the planet is quantifiable.
Accurately quantifiable or just quantifiable? Okay. I'm 100% certain that we can quantify the damage to the planet.
Mm-hmm. And accurate. The whole thing of precision is something we're going to get through.
I'm not making any
big conversation
accuracy or precision around what the quantification is.
Yeah. We have the capacity to heal the planet through collaboration.
I'm 90% certain of that.
Carbon sequestration has value.
There's a lot of subtlety in this, so I'm ratcheting it down to something like 60% certain.
We can precisely measure ecological state change.
There's a lot of complexity and uncertainty there, so I'm going to go with 60% on that one too.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how much uncertainty there is, but this is how most of the way we communicate online is like single sentences. Eco credits are a way to incentivize regenerative practices.
Yeah, I feel more certain about that. I would say, I'm trying to remember what I'll put it up at like 90% certain.
Okay. Incentivizing regenerative actions is essential to restoring Earth's ecosystems.
I'll put, 90% certain.
Mm-hmm. Discrete actions can be known to be regenerative versus degenerative with some degree of confidence over time.
It's just asking, looking backwards or known in the moment?
Mm-hmm. Backwards.
Yeah, I'm like 80% certain.
Mm-hmm. Incentives and basic economic principles drive individuals' decisions about how they interact with nature.
50% certain.
Mm-hmm. We can identify ecological damage caused by humans through scientific data.
The question, I think, was we can identify
ecological
damage caused by humans through scientific data.
Yeah, like looking at scientific data.
Yeah. I think that's up there, like 80% certain.
Incentives within traditional markets do not properly reflect the true value of regenerative practices and actions.
That one I'm fairly certain of. I'd say I'm like 90+% certain.
Yeah. Traditional economic models are insufficient to drive human behavior in ways that align with our values around ecology and sustainability.
I'm 100% certain about that.
Yeah. Technology can be used to measure, monitor, and quantify our impact on the environment.
I am 100% certain about that.
Yeah. You see how we're kind of narrowing in?
No, but I'm not making any
I know. We're going to talk
accuracy or precision claims.
Yeah. That's the fun thing that, me and Pekowski and you are so fascinated by.
Yeah.
It is a very complex question, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of focus, but it's
calibration.
Fun to me. Anyways.
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay, so we're going to go into some predictions. We as a species will not experience the worst effects of climate change.
I actually think that is nearly 95% true.
Okay.
There are other species who will experience worse effects of climate change than we will.
If I recall, I think I read something recently that we're just below the worst initial predictions from way back when. We're slightly below the very worst possible outcome. So technically, we definitely have avoided the worst possible outcome.
But I'm interpreting maybe your question in a way that's different from how you asked. So I was interpreting it as we as a species, relative to other species, will experience the worst. And I actually think other species are going to have worse impacts and experience. If what you're asking is we're on track for the worst possible climate scenario, actually, I would also say I think I would rate that, if that's the question, we're on track for the worst possible climate scenario, I would say 20% certain.
Yeah. I mean, this comes down to why I'm so focused on language, and I'm so focused on it as an intersubjective medium of communication about truth, about the state of the reality, because while we can collect scientific data and we can look at it, what really matters is the felt sense of being in place. And if the felt sense of being in place does not feel healthy, but technically speaking, some ledger or some scientist out there says, no, you're regenerated, you're healthy. And they're like, but we're miserable. What are you talking about? Then there's sort of a misalignment. And I think that we're going to see more and more of these models. Like Pekowski said, it's like language models allow us to evaluate semantics like dynamics. Like we can evaluate the semantics in a mathematical way. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that integrated into these more precise representations of truth that are based off of discrete data, and trying to form a synthesis from both language data, perception data, as well as discrete measures of environmental health. We will see quantifiable and verifiable improvements in the health of local ecosystems.
100% true.
Okay. Water will always flow downhill.
I want a time frame for that to increase my certainty above 60%. That's as far as I'm going. Without time frame calibration.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Hey, have you ever been in a state of flow as you went on a hike?
Yeah.
Have you ever walked up a hill?
That's a great point. That's a good point. Yes. And yes, I'm a big bag of water.
Yeah. That's the most fascinating thing about consciousness to me, is that's not supposed to happen. That's not supposed to happen at all. And then it does. And so that's what I think is just with the active inference stuff, we talk a lot about energy and about entropy. And all of this, we're talking about flows of entropy in relationship to the human experience of living. And so it's really important when we talk about changing systems at this scale, especially when there's energy flowing through them. These are living environments. It's not a building that you build where there's a spec that you hold and you have the steel be a certain level of rigidity. Every ecosystem is different and unique. And so therefore, it's not as simple as just, I think, what a lot of the other refi projects are doing. And I think that's why it's really important that you're investing in the stuff that me and Matt are doing, because ultimately that is what has to be brought into it to have a holistic change in the health of ecosystems, from my perception. Next claim. Proof of stake will outlive proof of work.
I'd say I'm like 5%. That's pretty low.
Yeah, I don't know.
Pretty low probability. I put it at like 5%.
Regen Network will be the backbone of a regenerative economy.
I think there's a lot of game left here, so I'm bullish, but I'm realistic. So I'd say, give it 51%.
I would give it a better shot than that. But,
maybe 65.
Okay. I mean, you already have this mentality with Cosmos as like interchain. Like, I think that gives you the foundation, because you're already setting in this foundation of literally not like one. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is an inherent design focus within it that I think makes a lot of sense. Okay. Regen Network will use tools like Ceres and active inference in relationship to intersubjective verification to add confidence to claims about ecological state change.
Yeah, I place it as 100% because it's already happening.
Yeah. We will continue to damage the ecology over the next 20 years.
I'm 80% sure that's true.
Can you make a prediction about what year is probably the most likely tipping point where there's more regenerative action than degenerative action?
Great question. 2042.
That sounds about right. Humanity will begin to value ecological assets more and recognize their importance as an asset class.
90% certain.
Mm-hmm. Eco credits will be a major industry in the future.
95% certain.
Mm-hmm. Human ingenuity and technology will be used to undo much of the damage we've caused.
I'm 100% sure it will be attempted, and I'm 85% sure it will succeed.
Mm-hmm. Human ingenuity and technology will cause future damage that we don't currently predict.
95% certain.
It's the nature of our being. New solutions cause new problems. Okay, so that's the end of that. And now I just have some questions. Oh, no, here's what I'm going to do. Have you seen the clip I sent from the ending of the Futarchy episode where I mentioned that you're going to be the next speaker?
I didn't see it, no.
I just posted it in here in the chat.
Okay.
Hopefully, the next episode will be with Greg Landua. I don't know if he's pronouncing his name right, but he's something called the Regen Network, I think. And it involves some sort of logging of claims about improving the environment and some sort of trackable metrics, and then some sort of reward for actively stewarding the environment. I think I could be doing that wrong, but to me, that sounds great. That sounds like something that I should explore, that we should explore, that we should learn more about, and where I should learn where maybe I have missed something, because, you know, they've actually created this implementation, so there should be some sort of, I think, confidence there that what they're doing is going to work and is not going to have a lot of second order effects. So hopefully I'll get to talk to Greg soon, and I hope you enjoyed this talk and my review, which is very long.
Nice.
So that is not quite an accurate description of what it is. It is tangential. It is related to where Gregory has thought about where he wants to go. And I just think it's so interesting because that's me from the outside and having no awareness of what it is. I mean, you have the word. I didn't even know the name of it. I didn't even know exactly how to pronounce your name. And then later, we started working together. And now I have a very broader and more nuanced understanding of what it is.
In a lot of ways, I think you did a decent job of reflecting some of the core essence. I would say the I would say there's a set of things like in this context, right, where we're doing this longer form, calibrating different pieces. I would say, in response to that, I would say the essence of Regen Network
Mm-hmm.
is to harmonize the agency of different actors
Mm-hmm.
to regenerate the ecosystems that they're embedded in and reliant on.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Regen Network is for.
Mm-hmm.
And the infrastructure that allows people to make claims and assess claims and share data and mint symbolic representations of successful regeneration, like an eco credit, those are instruments that that we're experimenting with and evolving and trying to use to achieve that goal, which is really enabling humans to regenerate ourselves into a force for regeneration, into a keystone species on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think you were describing some of the instruments that we're building
Mm-hmm.
to grow that capability of regeneration.
Yeah, because what I was really interested then and now is the intersubjective verification aspect, the ecological state aspect, like measuring what ecological state is, and the incentivization of action. So when I read the ideas that were related to intersubjective verification before I saw you use that specific word. And when I saw the phrase on the ground projects, that like the distinction that these eco credits were tied to actual things. And now, especially that I know this concept of retiring, where the outcome is tied to a person, which I view as a sort of staking, which I think staking is incredibly important for, sort of the ownership over the outcomes of actions that we take. And so, yeah, that's why it really sort of gravitated to me. And the particulars of like the implementation of any particular thing are they have to be done. But if we want like as many people as possible to resonate with them, there have to be forms and myths and stories and representations of the same information that are non-technical. And normally that takes lots of money to pay people to write stuff. But we've now seen this interesting facet, which is that just by taking all of these ideas and boiling this into this regen model, that we have this moving target about like, what is the vision of regen and where is it going and why? I want to talk about health as a concept is a thing that's been stuck in my head since like probably the first listener John asked episode, which is basically like people have different perceptions of ecological health and they have to live together and they kind of fight over what is the best action and fight over what reality or is the best to live within. Um, so how do we define health? How do we define ecological health?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, the one of the principles we have at Regen Network is that this should be something that humans who inhabit a specific place, a bioregion, a watershed, an ecosystem, ask and answer together. So that's sort of like the foundation. is
Mm-hmm.
that ecological health is something that emerges from context.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't, and I think, yeah. So I think that that's sort of like the disclaimer. I think, um, I think, I can sort of, that said, I can take a stab at sort of, roughing out what ecological health is going to look like in a few different places.
Mm-hmm.
But that sort of first principle of definitions of ecological health need to be generated from a specific context and place with participation from people and the environment that they're living in, the ecosystem that they're living
Yes. Well, I just asked this because so much of our attention right now is focused on the quantification of things like carbon. And we know like new things like microplastics in the environment are becoming a new problem. It's a building problem, and we can predict that it's going to be bigger in the future. Do we want to get to the point in the future where you have to build a whole new system to incentivize people to not put microplastics into the environment? Or is there a way that we incentivize preemptively so that we're not in a regenerative space? We're just saying, how do we ensure that actions that people are knowing to have detrimental future effects do not get taken? And how do we incentivize those things? Because I think where you and I are very aligned is just this notion that incentives are, even the incentive as a word, its root word is maybe not the best history, but just the idea of incentives being essential to ecological state change. I think we're in alignment. And I wanted you to just talk a little bit about ecological state change in relation to incentive, in relationship to just individual lives. Like maybe tell stories of actual people, envision stories of actual people living their lives in relationship to Regen Network, being incentivized to do good work and feeling empowered by the rewards that they are getting from interfacing with this network.
Yeah. So, well, there's a bunch of layers there that you're pointing towards. Um, I'll start with the negatives of incentives,
Mm-hmm.
just to unpack that a little bit, because I think
Mm-hmm.
it's useful, yeah, to have that nuance in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, oftentimes incentives as an economic, carrot,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to disincentives as an economic stick,
Mm-hmm.
come from a paradigm of behaviorism in which human agency is sort of like stripped away, and we're just being programmed by humans, and other agents in the system are just sort of able to be programmed. um, and I think that that's not a fully accurate, that paradigm of incentives is neither accurate nor healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, however, it also has some level of truth. So it's incomplete truth. It's an incomplete truth, but it's like statistically relevant that you can look at broad strokes, and you can engage with behavioral modification with a dog or a kid or a prisoner, and that shit kind of works, um, but only in these limited constrained confines. And so there's a lot more. So just want to say there's a lot more beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know I think that's important to call out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think incentives are a way of having at least from the paradigm I'm coming from, the design of incentives is a way of having a conversation about what we want and what we don't want, and how to honor and support people who are engaging with, for instance, regenerating ecosystems, or designing businesses that have that have less negative externalities or more positive externalities,
Mm-hmm.
and rewarding that as sort of like a base layer, just as a basis. It's I think it's just dangerous to think that that's the only way things get done, because it's not. Because a lot of us never had any incentives. Like you, I don't believe that uh, you have an inspiration that you're driving towards in the world for your art and for your inquiry and for your vocation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so do I, and so do others. And there's some sort of like beautiful magic, intrinsic magic there that is also important to acknowledge and uplift. And at the same time, sort of statistics being what they are and humans being who we are at a population level, if we want to create a foundation to coordinate and deal with these wicked, challenging problems like microplastics or climate change, we do need to design incentives that reward people for solving complex problems and for sort of like paying it forward in a
Mm-hmm.
significant way. So that's sort of there's a whole other world there, but we can sort of like put a point on that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you direct me more in the direction that you're wanting me to speak in
Oh
relationship to
no,
example?
I mean that was great. I just wanted you to talk about it in general. Um, I think it's important to talk about the incentive. I could cut this out if it doesn't ring true, whatever. But I think it's important to talk about the incentive between us because, um, like you've paid me to be able to exist, right? And I think that maybe some people watching this might definitely notice me being a little bit more trying harder to help Regen Network as a concept be understood in this moment. Whereas, like in my last one with Robin, um, I couldn't help myself from like I recorded like a 30-minute thing where I was like just shitting, not shitting. I'm just trying to be nice about it, but trying to break down like how I thought this obsession with the financial incentive and just assuming the markets were going to magically work if you added prediction to them. I like went down on it. And like I have all these videos that are saying like, okay, the way that money incentivizes our individual action can change our behavior, and then also we have a connection along this way. So how do we ensure that I am completely truthful in like how I feel when there is that relationship? That's something that I constantly try to explain to people, is that the relationship that you have when working together, even if it's in a company, people don't necessarily feel as comfortable expressing the full truth if they have that relationship between them. I had kind of an attitude, and I always did it, so I don't give a shit. So I'd always tell my bosses, just like fuck off all the time and stuff like that. But like, I think it's really
So,
important to explore the notion that in everything that we try to do, there is this foundation. Everything that you want to be able to do, you have to go talk to investors right now. And that guides your action in life, that guides your desires in life. And basically, if we can't provide for ourselves, if we can't feed ourselves, then we do things differently. And if you look all over the world and you look at places that do not have resources, where they're living on like $1 a day, where they just don't have access to clean water, and you see the way that they actually live their lives day to day, it's very different than us. Whereas you go back to that original thing of the parable of rain, and you also see that there. Whereas if you just throw money at these local communities, if you just throw money at these dilapidated places, it actually does not seem to magically heal them.
no, it won't.
So,
You'll degrade them further, probably.
yes. So that's the big question, is when you have this tokenized resource, when you're actually trying to regenerate things, and when you have that foundational reality with that just throwing resources at a locality does not regenerate it. Can you talk a bit about that conceptually when we're looking at basically a map of like the world, and there's like, it's like a heat map of regeneration to degeneration. Some places are thriving and doing great. Some pieces are like Flint, Michigan, that are like, or Haiti, where they're really, really, struggling. And ultimately, it's like we want to just bring up the places that are suffering. We don't really necessarily need to do too much with the places that are functioning. In fact, the places that are functioning have the resources that probably could help, but we need to create I think we need to create a functional binding between those that isn't just giving, that isn't just like, here's the money. And so I'm very interested in this type of incentive where it's like, what does the local want in their community? How do they want to see their locality regenerated? What do they have? And how can you make that connection so that there is this local regeneration that is in alignment with what we actually want to see in the long term, which is a sustainable local ecosystem that is good air, good water, and makes the people who live there feel like they're thriving.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So,
Yes.
I'll start with where you ended, but I do want to
Mm-hmm.
circle back around on incentives and this sort of theme of what's the quote? It's something like, it's very hard to get a man to understand when his paycheck depends on him not understanding. I think that's an Albert Einstein quote.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, we'll circle back around because that's sort of
Mm-hmm.
you started there, sort of
Mm-hmm.
owning that, we have had an economic financial arrangement, a relationship to fund your development of Ceres. That's part of how you've learned all this context and all these
Mm-hmm.
other things. So it's important for people to understand that. It also colors your perception of the things. So you've owned that. Let's circle back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to get to this concept of, anything in excess can be toxic. It's like
Mm-hmm.
too much nitrogen can be toxic. Too much carbon can be toxic. Too much money can be toxic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Too much oxygen could be toxic. Um, so this is number one. Number two, we can flow resources responsibly. Like one way to limit resource flow and align it with meaning and with the increase of capacities and capabilities and the growth of, the mycelial networks and the
Mm-hmm.
diversity of plants and the basins that can catch and store that liquidity in a healthy way, is how people, build vocations around regeneration, for instance. So if you have a system, if you have a culture that starts to evolve in which, any human could go out and just engage with watershed restoration, right? And they could make a basic income that could, keep their kids fed and
Mm-hmm.
clothed. And there's just like this basic level where, in exchange for, it's like not universal basic income, right? It's, if you're contributing to the health of the whole, you'll
Mm-hmm.
be taken care of. And I'm not actually arguing against universal basic income in this instance. I'm just saying,
Mm-hmm.
like this idea of creating basic flow of incentives to do things that, really are important,
Mm-hmm.
foundational elements of societal and planetary health. I think, for me at least, that's the type of work I actually like. If I was to retire, this is like a weird thing about incentives. If I was to retire today, I would go out and do watershed restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what I would go do. I love doing it. I want to do it with my kid, and I would just go do it. Like if I felt financially taken care of in a way, and that's not true because I feel financially okay. I feel like what I want though is to have a societal system that adequately rewards people for doing what's really deeply important, which
Mm-hmm.
is humans as responsible custodians and stewards of the landscapes they live in. Right? That's what I want. I deeply feel called to try to make that the reality we all live in.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires me to be engaged with this like big coordination challenge, right? How economics and governance and technology and science all applied to creating this hyperstructure in which our society is able to adequately flow resources to humans who are engaged with ecological regeneration, with cleaning our metaphorical house.
Yes.
But ultimately, deep down, all I really want to do is be clean, like to be out there in doing that watershed restoration and, sort of regenerating landscapes, because it's so freaking fun and poetic and beautiful. And there's so much space for artistry and friendship and, all of these layers of what, in my aesthetic, I really feel like is what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you were sort of talking about, so another theme that you were speaking to, I think, is oftentimes referred to as the different economic levels between the global north and the global south, in air quotes, right? Where you have certain societies that are rich and other societies that are poor, certain societies that have already gone through some economic arc and have extracted a huge amount of resources for themselves and are on the verge of some sort of post-capitalist service economy thing, information economy thing. And then you have other societies that have, historically had value extracted from them, in which people are still living subsistence lifestyle, oftentimes still small holder farmers, campesinos, peasants, agrarian, or displaced.
Mm-hmm.
And that economic reality and physical, social, cultural reality is incredibly important to understand if we're going to design some sort of coordination system in which we're flowing resources to regenerating the biological, ecological integrity of the biosphere, of watersheds, of agriculture systems, because that's the reality of people and humans. And so I think there's a really, in a way, there's a really strong case to be made for, I believe, for acknowledging the value of ecological assets and the services rendered by humans who can regenerate and grow those ecological assets and bring them onto our metaphorical balance sheet, right? As a way of ensuring that all of that value that was extracted from from a degenerative economic paradigm, just extracting value from colonies and humans, ecosystems. If we can take that financial capital and essentially reinvest it back into living capital and back into cultural capital, that reciprocity, that exchange, that flowing of resources back, it ensures that financial capital isn't just stranded and it doesn't just wither and die as this sort of like rotten fruit on the vine of capitalism. It gives it somewhere to go, and it sort of it transitions us into a very different looking, I believe, societal, economic, and cultural paradigm in which the essence of value and money actually are transformed through this process that I'm talking about, right? Value and money is symbolic cultural representation, right? It has gone through many iterations and evolutions through the history of humanity and the prehistory of humanity, right? And it is malleable. It can be evolved. We can apply our own evolutionary processes to generate new mimetic understandings of what is true value. Just taking a step back, just think about Dogecoin. What the hell is it? There's a dog meme coin. A group of people got together on the internet and decided to imbue value to the most abstract thing in the world, right? And so that actually, that's a kind of a joke, but it gives me hope, because it gives me hope that we can root the symbolic representation of value into ecological health and ecological function and a holistic relationship between humans and the landscapes that they inhabit. And that actually does this twofold thing. It recenters people who at the moment are the most marginal in today's economy
Mhm.
as, by and large, the most important stewards of that value, right? So it puts them in the seat of receiving of a livelihood vocation that is enormously generative and I believe very powerful, very empowering.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, it allows that what I would consider to be stranded, alienated capital, which is out there, that financial capital, which got hoovered up through all of these, pretty ugly, I think, in many ways, pretty ugly history. Also beautiful. There's also beautiful things and innovation and things, but lots of desperation in that story. It allows that capital to be redeemed in a way and
Mhm.
be replanted and to be part of a story of redemption and regeneration. And at the core of that whole story that I'm talking about is this concept of what are we incentivizing? What are we valuing? Like
Mhm.
above incentive is value. What do we value? And therefore, what are we willing to pay for? What are we willing to incentivize? So hopefully that riff is more or less what you were looking for.
I have a lot of thoughts. The first is about that desire to restore local watersheds, and why I was asking about individual regeneration that had happened locally, and that there are pockets of local regeneration through action that people take, and what appears to be non-functional ecosystems become functional ecosystems. But it's the overall distributed nature of that regeneration that we're interested in, and how do we get these isolated pockets to happen. So the question I
For
wanted
sure.
to ask was, what is the balance in rewards between securing the chain and taking actions to heal the planet? Because there is a lot on one side, which is, okay, the chain has to exist, so people have to do individual things, and then they get rewarded for securing the chain in some regard. And then there's the other half of it, which is, you actually have to do things that actually help the planet. And a lot of what we've seen within a lot of these crypto things is just a desire to get rich. I don't know that we've necessarily seen a mechanism that has motivated individual action at scale yet, beyond the desire to get uh, rich quick through just staking or through doing proof of work or something like that. And so, could
Great
you just talk about
question.
the balance between those things?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the ultimate aim for Regen Network is that there is a crystal clear relationship between the value of regen, the staking and governance token, and
Mhm.
the regeneration that Regen Network as a community has co-created in the world. That you could see that and you could calculate it and you could be like, wow, that's the regeneration as represented by these eco credits and the outcomes, the hectares regenerated, the watersheds regenerated, the number of beavers out there and
Mhm.
doing their thing, or the soil carbon, all of those other things. At the moment, I think we're just starting to really bootstrap the network. So a lot of more rewards than I think is probably right go to securing the network and just like the network existing. However, of course, in defense of that, like you need a state machine, you need consent, you need ecological data consensus, you need this foundation for the intersubjective verification, for the minting of assets, for the exchange of things. That all has to exist as a prerequisite for the next step. So there has to be a certain amount of faith that we together are going to continue to evolve things to get closer and closer to that end goal in which we're really together incentivizing regeneration. Now, currently the theory is, and I think, more and more the reality is that people using the technology and the platform to mint an eco credit will then be receiving exterior money, right? So they're not necessarily receiving regen for that. There isn't a protocol, there's a marketplace, right? So people, because there is demand for these eco credits, just to say, this isn't just an autopoetic closed system that's incentivizing itself, although we do want to incentivize regeneration, but at the moment it's thought of as a system that interacts with exterior market actors who would like to buy those carbon credits or biodiversity credits in order to balance their ecological debt, right? And there's an existing market for that, and that's something that hopefully listeners can understand. Is there's a quite large existing market for that kind of activity, and that's meant to fuel the growth of the network and the growth of the movement, and provide the financial foundations for those incentives and the vocations that are now linked with regeneration.
So say there's a person right now who doesn't really have any resources at all, and they see Regen Network and like, I want to earn. Are you suggesting that there's something that I can personally do to be bound to one of these projects that they can earn from if they have no money right now through doing regenerative action?
I think, unfortunately, we are not quite there yet.
Okay. Okay.
I think I think the barrier. I think there's still a barrier to entry. At least, and I don't know that barrier of entry isn't actually monetary resources so much as it is expertise and time.
Yeah.
Right. So the ability to to create and market an eco credit, right,
Mm-hmm.
takes a variety of different forms of capital to achieve. Financial capital can be substituted by intellectual, experiential, living, cultural capitals, right? You don't necessarily need money to get there, but you need quite a bit of oomph to bring a new eco credit to market and get it sold the way that the world currently works. Now, I think as we continue to grow as a network, there is actually a purse of money of Regen that is able to be petitioned to and dispersed to set up new projects, to do new things. And so there's sort of like a self-subsidizing system in that way. But at the moment, I would say that there really is a barrier to entry, and that barrier to entry is time and capacity, and to a certain degree, financial, liquidity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. It's just time to make things, times to do things. Um, is there an optimal ecological state that we could refer to as a regenerated planet? I mean, is there going to be a moment where, like, okay, we've done it. It's regenerated, and it might degenerate, and then we might need to fix it again. But right now, we're in a healthy state, and we feel within this degree of confidence that the Earth is stable and providing the resources that it needs without us overtaking. Is there a way to get to that place?
I mean, in a very hand wavy general way, yeah. I think, the devil's in the details, and there's a lot of ways that you could say no. But, okay, so we have this biosphere. I think we want to achieve a balanced carbon cycle. There's respiration, represented by metabolizing carbon and releasing the carbon dioxide off into the atmosphere through that process. And then there's the inhalation of that carbon back into living systems through photosynthesis. And a balance and a big in breath basically, from the plant kingdom of what's been emitted by us over the last 100 years or so is important. I think that is really important for a number of different reasons. I think there's sort of a threshold there, and I don't think it's fixed. It's not like we should be shooting for a single thing and really like hard stability. It's going to be, it's going to be a dynamic disequilibrium. But I think we can, generally speaking, set some, big targets and kind of be trying to coordinate towards those. I also think more important than the atmospheric carbon outcome, I think, is healthy local carbon cycles and ecological function. That's by far more important, and it's actually easier in a lot of ways to quantify and to think about that from a water perspective, from sort of, because water, quality, respiration from sort of the biotic pump that
Mhm.
trees and other plants exhibit, and local water cycles and things like that, are actually really fantastic proxies for a more holistic ecological health. And I don't think we're going to get there. Some of the dangers of this whole sort of carbon tunnel vision, have to do with, yeah, I guess sort of, I'm a little skeptical that creating an industry the scale of the aerospace industry, aviation and space, to suck atmospheric carbon into giant machines,
Yeah.
is really the way out here, which is a
Mhm.
lot of people, a lot of engineers and economists for that matter, I think, get sucked into this carbon tunnel vision, and they start to rationalize and incentivize this other world, right? This world in which machines are, balancing the carbon
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
atmospheric carbon budget and other things. And I just, I don't really see, either from a cost effective or a world that I want my kids to live in, or in a,
Yeah.
real reality of
Yeah.
biosphere balance, that's really going to get us there.
Yeah, that actually aligns very much with like my criticism of what was like Team Seas, which was basically they had these machines that collected trash at the end of rivers. And that was like they got a bunch of attention all over the world to get like random people to donate a little bit of money. And it's like, that's not really holistic. You're getting at the final location of where it ends up, but there's a whole journey up through the entire river from the source to the outcome. And you're trying to say, okay, we'll just have machines that clean up, and you just behave however you want. If you want to throw your shit in the river, that's fine, because there's a machine that's going to pick up after you at the end. I'm like, oh God, this is how most people want to live, is they want to have like automated systems that allow them to be as ridiculous as they possibly can without ever having to think about how their actions impact others.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I mean, there's a whole world there around this sort of, yeah. There's a whole world there, I think, around free will and agency and society,
mhm,
culture. What's the culture that we're trying to create? What's the role of individual responsibility? Are we just trying to go for some, I guess, consumer or luxury communist utopia that's been
yeah.
like AI automated, and people just get to kind of be like, blah, and there isn't much accountability. Maybe there's some central coordination from the top. Or are we going to let it be a little bit more chaotic? Are we trying to create a system in which people are expressing their agency, and there's a little bit more chaos,
Mhm,
but there's also sort of the space for people to take personal responsibility and accountability, and the space for us to evolve our cultural response to these big questions, which is a much longer game, right?
mhm,
To generate new rituals, to generate new cultural
mhm, mhm,
approaches in which we have intrinsic motivations, in which we're transforming the symbolic representation of value. um, these are big present moment questions that I think a lot of people grapple with, and certainly a lot of people in power, I think, have probably um, tacit subconscious bias in one
mhm.
way or the other. And they're just sort of cranking away with their philosophy of change, and then you see that, you see the wake of that, and how people are approaching
Yeah,
business and change and politics.
yeah. So we have about 20 minutes left. I want to talk about health from the foundation of data, and then take the data and talk about regenerative intelligence on top of that. Because the foundation of what you're doing right now is really related to data. You have the eco credit module and you have the data module. And those are the two things that are really being focused on so far, and just getting right. And in the data model, there's this notion of attestation. And in the Cosmos SDK, there's this notion of validation, and validation is related to the security of the chain itself. But then there's this other concept within Regen Network, which is about data and whether we can trust data that we can't, that there's uncertainty about. With a chain and validation, the chain has to be absolute. It is one state that has in the past. You cannot have some sort of like wishy-washy bit about this. But attestation of ecological state of data it's a whole other thing. And so let's go back to that concept of precision and measuring data. And because let's start with this foundation. The data that is associated with all this is not stored on chain. There's this concept of anchoring where you have the Regen Net a registry, which is not on chain, where data is stored, and then it is anchored, which means there's a hash of that data, and that is stored on the actual chain, so you know where to find it. And then individual testers are associated with that data in some regard. Can you just talk about this whole complex problem for a bit?
Sure. So generally speaking, if people are interested in a pretty good overview of kind of where we're going with this, you could read the chapters on science that Balaji's network state covers, in which he's kind of talking about this idea of a composable attestation graph approach to knowledge generation, in which you're really wanting to create a larger system where a specific claim of truth, scientific truth, can be replicated by any other actor in the system from source, right? From the primary data, the algorithm that you're running, or algorithms that you're running, right? To process that data into the final claim, like, sky is blue, or this plant is healthy, or this soil carbon went from 8% to 10% over this period of time, whatever the claim is, that then references, maybe a unit, like a ton of carbon.
Yep.
So we're building this system where it's really important to create the ability for who is saying what about where, using what data and what methodologies and algorithms can be embedded into the metadata of that claim so that it can become replicable. And as you said, the architectural approach for that is to have off-chain data and on-chain attestations in the form of anchoring and signatures. And so when you sign something, there's an entity that is signing, hey, this is the data and here's the address, and I have audited it and I give my approval to it, right?
Yeah.
And so you're setting up the conditions for very efficient auditing. You're not, just to be clear, pretending that all of the data that makes it on chain is perfect, accurate, or precise. You're creating the circumstances to lower the costs of auditing and understanding the precision of accuracy of any given claim, right? We're trying to make the cost of auditing as close to zero as possible. At the end of the day, that's sort of like the knowledge theory behind what we're aiming towards with our approach to data. We use a semantic web standard called RDF, which allows data to be represented in a triplicate form. That's probably more information than is necessary. And people can look up RDF data schema, W3C. It's cool and geeky, and it allows you to describe groups of related resources and relationships with any particular attestation, right? So you can be, ascribing the relationship between the soil carbon and the multispectral data imagery that helped to verify that, or the identity of the lab. So you're sort of embedding relationship into a specific piece of data. And again, this sort of furthers this vision of creating a knowledge graph that's lowering the cost of auditing and replicating any specific claim. And that's the approach to try to create sort of transparency and I think something that starts to approach wisdom emerging out of the system, because we have context, we have what Nora Bateson refers to as warm data. It's relational. You have a relationship between different pieces of data. So it's not just sort of like the pure cold determinism of the computer, right? So the state machine, the blockchain is maintaining this durability, this immutability, this statefulness that then we can build this graph of who is saying what about where, using what data and what methodologies, what algorithms have been involved, and what is the relationship between each of those component parts and the other. So I'll pause there, and hopefully that's a useful riff.
No, it's very great. It's a great answer. It's very useful. Inherent into intersubjective verification is some concept of trust, whether it be trust of a source or trust of information. Is the approach to say that particular attesters are more or less reliable sources over time, or is it only in relationship to the data itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially to bootstrap the system, you have to have a sort of a sense of a reputation and trust around entities that are making attestations, like a soil lab or a purveyor of satellite data, or a monitor or an auditor out in the field. These are going to be durable identities in the system that have a lot at risk if they provide faulty data, because it's pretty easy to go in and dig it out and see, and it's kind of like a high cost if you get caught out, and it's fairly low.
What's the cost? What's the cost if like we're talking about just disagreement now? Like somebody attested something, somebody else is saying, I disagree with you, that's not true. How is that resolved, that level of disagreement, especially when there's different people with different levels of stake behind it?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, this is resolved. All eco credits that are currently flowing through Regen Registry are legal agreements between parties in which the blockchain is used to represent the data that's underpinning that agreement. And so if you're providing fraudulent information, you are liable for fraud. Now, if it's just miscalculated, eco credit classes have buffer pools and uncertainty clauses in which you're disclaiming all of this information around the level of certainty. So if you
Tell me about that.
If you find yourself outside of the statistical level of certainty which the credit class allows, then you can't be minting a credit. Otherwise, you'd be committing fraud.
So how is that uncertainty being evaluated by?
Well, currently it's variable. It's variable, right?
So they choose through the contract.
Yeah. So different statistical methods for different types of ecological state claims are going to have different ways of reporting that uncertainty. This is one of the things that we're working with Matt Perkowski on, and the idea of active inferencing is that it is possible that we could evolve a sort of a standard approach to the quantification of uncertainty using active inference. And that would be really powerful and and so work is being done on that. But currently it's just like a science paper. If you read a science paper at the beginning, they're giving you the sort of like R value, statistical certainty of the specific approach that's been taken and okay, cool. That is related to the methodology, is related to the credit class, and it's related to the contract between parties around that specific unit. So we have yet to be able to automate that whole process. We're still relying on a lot of the legacy systems for how you make a contract between parties about something, with our old system.
Yeah, and we're definitely actively in thought about that. And any of my viewers know, like, this is directly related to all of my work as well. And you've probably seen a lot of these videos with me obsessing about representations of uncertainty and intersubjective verification about individuals. This is specifically more about the models themselves. And that, say you have a satellite shot of a place of land over time, and you're trying to evaluate some aspect of ecological health about that, whether it's deforestation or like things growing back, or give an example of some things that you can detect through satellite.
So you could detect deforestation, you can detect biomass increase or decrease through management.
And so there's going to be different models for these. There's going to be different models for these looking at the same information, and you have to transmit, or like you have to convert forms of data that are more esoteric, like an image, into something that is actionable and useful. And so the stuff with Ceres is about that semantic data. Ultimately, Ceres is just going to is basically one of the other models that goes into for assessing local health of community, or assessing something specifically. And so what the goal is to have this active inference so that you can evaluate the value of different models that are actually making these claims, because different models might make different claims about the same data, but it has to be reduced to something that is operable, because you can't just say add an image to the chain and say with that, like there needs to be do you know what I'm saying when I say there needs to be conversion between the data that's interpretable by humans into something that is discrete and actionable, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's sort of in the white paper, we talked about ecological state protocols. Now we talk a lot more about digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, and credits and other things, because we've started to adopt more and more, for better or worse, the current language that the market exists, right? Because as I was saying, we've sort of bent towards the logic of the existing market to facilitate people bringing eco credits into existing markets to fund regeneration, right? In the early days, we were thinking much more about this like autopoetic funding of regeneration, and had a very clear concept of ecological state protocols, which are models, right? And maybe nested models of models interacting with one another that are producing some actionable claim, like a soil carbon claim, or a biodiversity claim, or a holistic regenerative outcome claim it's multivariant and multivariable. And you have to be able to decompose those and kind of audit the certainty or uncertainty of the component pieces. And so in that way, I think what we're doing and what we've been doing for years is very similar to some of the work at the Consilience Project. It's very similar to the work that you're doing. It's very similar to this emerging quest for what I geekily and what you refer to as intersubjective knowledge generation and verification. How do we create a structure where we can independently verify a specific claim pretty cheaply, right? Fairly easily, right? And so that means some mixture of being able to replicate every aspect. Like the epitome of this is being able to quickly and easily replicate every component piece of the claim, all of the science, all of the data, the whole thing. You can compile it up, and if it doesn't compute, something's wrong, right? On that side of things, and there are some problems with heading that way too, but that's like on one hand. On the other hand is just having a graph and having immutability or durability of the reputation of the different parties who have a symbol to claim, in which you can have a sort of shorthand version of that. That also
Yeah.
has problems, right? It has its issues because you can
Yeah.
sort of capture that. And, so you need to sort of create a system that is moving towards both of those and understanding the limitations of both as well.
Yeah. This is what I really wanted people to understand about Regen Network, because if you, there is, with any idea, any memes have births, they have lives, and then they have deaths. And there is what Regen Network was when you go look at the white paper. There's what it was said there. There is what it is now, and there's what Gregory has communicated to me about his broader vision. And I think that vision of the future is extremely interesting and well thought out. And I have not seen as much explorations of Regen Network through this lens of how we've been discussing it. So I guess we're getting pretty close to the end. I wanted to ask about that, asking the question of precision, of resolution, of ecological health. How high of a resolution image can we get? How can we move towards precision? How can we move towards accuracy? How can we be accountable if the chain has some error in its confidence about the accuracy of the data and it causes nth order effects, right? If the resolution isn't high enough and we incentivize actions that actually cause more damage, how are we thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I think this is discrete to every credit class. So, within
Mm-hmm.
any credit class, you're creating an agreement about the level of precision and accuracy
Mm-hmm.
around a specific outcome or practice that is being paid for in the credit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is for the counterparties who are valuing that specific credit, not a universal, Regen network wide standard, to make agreements about the level of certainty, precision, and accuracy and risks associated with that credit to be kind of worked out. And in order to do that, generally you create buffer pools, essentially. So you create buffer pools to represent uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
associated with the claim. You create buffer pools to represent any potential downside leakage or harm that could happen in a different place that was unforeseen. One of the things that we're working on is trying to make those buffer pools flexible so that as more information is brought in, either those credits can be released, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they sort of like grow in size or stay stable, and
Mm-hmm.
then the value of that credit can sort of go down in the market.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just important to understand we don't have at the moment, and I think active inference, one way we might approach creating a more systemic, um, I guess, governance around precision, rigor, certainty, uncertainty, and these various buffer pools and financial mechanisms is possibly through active inference and the use of active inference paradigm to
Yeah.
create these generative models that help us hone in on these really big questions.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this, but the Iris actual architecture, which I don't have the resources to actually build right now, and I'm relying on other tools. It's built off of active learning, which is a flavor of active inference, where the model actually seeks out additional information from particular sources where it is uncertain about that data. It's a constant learning loop in relationship to expressions of certainty and uncertainty over time. So my next question is, where is Regen Network heading next?
Yeah, it's a great question. The next big, I think I'm excited to bring Ceres online in our Discord and maybe Twitter and then maybe other places. I think so that's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to start to see forward contracts. That's one of the big features that we're going to be working on in early next year, so that people can say, I would like this regenerative outcome, and I'm
Yeah.
going to get into a forward contract for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then people can start working on it. So currently it's just sort of like regeneration that's already happened. And so you can imagine that creates
Mm-hmm.
some, it's just a harder financial model if you already have to have produced it before it's going to get paid, obviously. Um, so those are big things. And, of course, governance. So
Yeah.
really important is the governance of credit classes, specific economic parameters, the creation of councils and communities that are focused on specific things.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next Regen Ledger 5.0 upgrade is really governance focused. The group module is going to be coming online, which is very exciting. It allows people to create and govern policies on the chain associated with credits, data standards, all sorts of other cool things. Up until now, that had been clunky at best, involving multi-sig wallets and all sorts of, it was just command line interface nonsense. So we're doing a big upgrade, and hopefully, pretty early Q1, we'll have some interfaces that allow people to sort of be digging in and self-governing standards and other important pieces of the puzzle. So that's just a smattering of things that we're working on. I think other things that are coming up as well, which are kind of fun. There's a big active discussion in our governance forum about upgrading the token economics and trying to incentivize regeneration more, building more incentives for science and other components, not just network security. So that's exciting. So yeah, there's a lot on the move. So it's going to be an exciting year.
Yeah, it seems like it. It feels like, just from a general regen, that meme right now has a lot of potential. I think people were excited about crypto. They were excited about the foundations of it. And then they're like, well, okay, what do we do with it? And the idea of regenerative finance connects with a lot of people. And they want their actions to be aligned with positive outcomes. They want to feel like they're not harming the planet through the actions that they take. And so right now, people can already go out there and you can buy these credit classes. So where would you suggest somebody would go if you'd like to buy some Regen token?
Well, if you want to buy Regen token, you can go to the Osmosis DEX, which is the biggest DEX in Cosmos. I think it's currently the biggest decentralized, or second biggest decentralized exchange behind Uniswap in terms of liquidity out there in the larger interchain world. And so you can pick Regen up there if you want to participate in governance and other things. And if you want to, offset your carbon footprint or carbon footprint of loved ones as a holiday gift or whatever, you could go to app.regen.network, and the marketplace is right there. You can choose from a number of different pretty cool credit classes. The current ones that are in stock right now are these city forest credits, which are forest conservation or regeneration taking place in municipalities. So this was a partnership with municipalities around the United States. So there's stuff in Issaquah, Washington, outside of Seattle, outside of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, outside of Austin and Texas. So there's cool sort of homegrown opportunities to engage there. And if you're interested in the science side and sort of Regen registry and the geekiness there, you can go to library.regen.network. And also, if you just go to regen.network, the website's fairly, it's quite a big project, so you might have to spend a little time, but all the information's there. So you can click through to Discord, where hopefully soon you'll be able to interact with Ceres, which is pretty fun. You can go through and keep track on Twitter or Telegram. So there's lots of different ways to engage.
And this is Gregory, and we've been talking to about Regen Network. And hopefully the next time we talk, we'll be talking about the baby between active inference and GPT and prediction, because there's a child there. I try, so I ask Matt so many questions. I talk to Maxwell over at Versus about these questions so much. I'm like, you don't understand how close the iris architecture is to what you're talking about. I just need you to answer a few questions and then it can be built. But it's like you said, it's just time. Everybody's busy. Everybody's focused on stuff. So
Totally.
I
Well,
think,
it's coming together. It's happening. I mean,
yeah,
this is a big renaissance that's taking place, and you're certainly at the ground floor of this next big revolution. So it's
yeah.
exciting moment.